High above San Francisco, far from the chaos of city streets and cable cars, there was a place few would ever see, a realm suspended between sky and earth. The Summit was its name, a hyper-exclusive, glass-walled club perched atop a shimmering skyscraper. The world's wealthiest, most powerful men and women gathered here, their voices muffled by the thick carpets and the endless hush of ambition. Tonight, a storm rolled quietly in over the Golden Gate, the city lights below flickering like coded signals from another universe. Marcus Thorne stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, one hand clutching a tumbler of aged whiskey, the other lost in thought. He cut a striking figure, tall and meticulously tailored, eyes sharp as the city skyline. The founder and CEO of Thorne Industries, Marcus was a man used to changing the world, or at the very least, buying the power to try. This evening was different. He was here not just to close a deal, but to redefine the future of warfare. His neural interface algorithm, Odyssey, was set to revolutionize fighter pilot performance for the Department of Defense. The contract, $500 million, with options for billions more, sat on the black marble table, paper crisp, waiting for his signature. Around him, high-ranking officials in dark suits kept their distance, the air tense with the weight of history and technology. Near the far end of the room, Elara Vance moved silently behind the polished bar, her hands precise and her expression unreadable. She wore the black uniform of the Summit, but her posture held a quiet defiance, something that never quite fit among the club's usual staff. Elara was no ordinary bartender. Her eyes missed nothing. The flicker of hesitation in Marcus's hand, the way the DoD general kept glancing at his phone, the nervous twitch of Dr. Julian Cole, Thorne's celebrated head of R&D, as he ran through his rehearsed talking points for the 10th time that hour. Elara knew how to become invisible when it mattered. That skill had kept her afloat in a city that could devour you whole. Her mind, however, never slept. Even as she sliced a lemon for a garnish, she listened, absorbed, calculated. She had heard enough secrets on these marble floors to take down entire empires, if only she dared. The clock on the wall ticked towards midnight, the hour chosen for privacy and deniability. Marcus Thorne set his glass down, straightened his cuffs, and strode to the head of the table. A hush settled. Even the music faded, as if the Summit itself understood the magnitude of the moment. The DoD general, broad-shouldered and silver-haired, leaned in. His aide placed the contract in front of Marcus, the gold pen glinting under the light. Dr. Cole hovered nearby, a ghost of anxiety flickering across his face. The man had always been eager for the spotlight, but tonight, even he seemed to sense the risk that came with being too close to greatness. As Marcus's hand hovered over the contract, a sudden shiver ran through the club. The windows trembled with distant thunder, and the lights flickered, a heartbeat of darkness. Elara paused, a chill running down her spine. She glanced at Marcus, then at the group of men in tailored suits and dark intentions. The moment seemed to stretch, as if fate itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Marcus cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, we're about to make history. Odyssey will change the game for every fighter pilot in America. We're not just selling a product, we're delivering the future." Polite applause followed. The general nodded, lips pressed thin. Elara drifted closer, silver tray in hand, offering fresh drinks. Her eyes met Marcus's for a fraction of a second, an unspoken understanding, or perhaps just the reflection of two people used to reading rooms and hiding secrets. Then, as if orchestrated by an unseen hand, Dr. Cole stepped forward. "Before we sign, he announced. "I thought you might enjoy a demonstration of Odyssey's core logic." He produced a sleek tablet, the screen glowing with arcane lines of code. "This," he said, "is the beauty of it. Real-time neural mapping, adaptive learning, absolute precision." The general's interest sharpened. He motioned for the tablet, studying the cascading strings of symbols. "Impressive," he murmured, handing it to his aide. From behind the bar, Ilara's gaze sharpened, catching the briefest glimpse of the algorithm displayed on screen. Her heart hammered in her chest. For a split second, the world spun. Familiar lines, equations, patterns she hadn't seen in years. Impossible. She turned away, masking her reaction with a steady hand. But inside her mind, the past came roaring back, dredging up memories she'd tried to bury beneath layers of bourbon and anonymity. Outside, lightning cracked, illuminating the Golden Gate in ghostly blue. The storm had finally arrived. Inside, Marcus's pen touched the paper. He was seconds from making history, but something felt wrong. He could sense it in the charged air, in the way Dr. Cole's voice wavered, in the fixed half-smile of the DoD general. The weight of $1 billion, of careers, of lives, pressed on his shoulders. Yet just as he began to sign, the tiniest sound, a glass clinking on the tray, a breath caught in the throat, caught his attention. He glanced up, eyes meeting Ilara's again. For the first time that night, he saw not just a bartender, but a shadow from another life, a question mark written in flesh and blood. Thunder rolled, shaking the floor. Marcus hesitated, pen frozen inches from the page. In that suspended moment, Ilara Vance knew the fate of more than one life hung on what would happen next. The night deepened around the summit, clouds pressing low and thick as the city below turned to rivers of gold and red light. Inside the cocoon of glass and privilege, tension flickered just beneath the surface. Marcus Thorne was known for moving fast, but tonight, every second seemed suspended by invisible wires. The pen still hovered over the contract, but the demonstration had shifted the atmosphere. Now something electric and uncertain filled the air. The DoD general, flanked by his silent aide, looked intently at the glowing tablet in Dr. Julian Cole's hands. Cole, always chasing recognition, let the code scroll down the screen for the room to see. "Odyssey's heart," he declared, his voice trembling slightly, "is this algorithm. You won't find anything like it outside our lab. Not in Russia, not in Beijing, not even in DARPA's wildest files." His confidence masked a growing unease, something brittle at the edges of his bravado. Ilara Vance, tending bar a few steps away, forced herself to move in rhythm with the background jazz. Yet her mind was caught in a whirlpool of numbers and dread. The symbols on Cole's tablet weren't just familiar. They were hers. Every line of code, every optimization, every cryptic variable bore her signature, hidden in the architecture of the algorithm. It was like seeing her own face in a stranger's reflection, a version of herself from another life, one she'd left burning behind her. Years ago, in a cluttered Stanford lab, Ilara had written a thesis on neural interface safety protocols, her hope and pride, abandoned when the project took a dark turn. She'd believed that work was lost forever, destroyed in the chaos of a supposed server fire, erased by her advisor, Professor Lena Harding, and banished to the world of secrets that run beneath Silicon Valley's surface. But here it was, paraded before generals, branded as someone else's genius, worth $500 million and perhaps far more. The sense of violation was immediate and visceral. Her hands shook as she wiped down a glass, barely registering the chatter at the table. She knew, in that instant, the full weight of her exile. Blacklisted from labs and companies, her name quietly erased, forced into a shadow life serving the architects of the future while her own was taken from her. The realization tightened her chest like a steel band. Marcus, his eyes always searching, watched Cole with a flicker of skepticism. He prided himself on knowing when something was off. And tonight, the signals came in small waves. Cole's sweaty hands, the too eager glances at the DoD officials, the forced humor that fell flat. The general's expression grew more guarded, his interest suddenly shifting from admiration to scrutiny. The air shifted as a gust of wind rattled the glass, making the city lights shimmer. Alara drifted closer, picking up empty glasses, feigning the casual movements of service while her thoughts raced. She glanced at the tablet again, just as Cole flicked to another page. Lines of error correction, stability checks, and then, buried beneath the scroll, a familiar sequence. Her sequence. A memory flashed. Late nights coding, music playing softly, her mind on fire with the possibilities of connecting human and machine without harm. She had poured her soul into those equations, convinced they could do good, before the warnings came, before the ethical boundaries blurred, before the pressure to deliver results eclipsed the need for caution. Now her worst fears returned. She remembered why she'd left, a single simulation that ended not with triumph, but with cascading failure, a feedback loop she couldn't resolve, one that left her sleepless for weeks. She had pulled the plug, buried the research, and tried to warn her advisor. But the system chews up outliers, and Professor Harding was more interested in patents and profit than warnings from a young prodigy. Alara's skin prickled as Cole, flush with pride, turned to the general and, with a flourish, wrote out the core string of the algorithm. "This," he said, "is the key. The world will never be the same." For a split second, Alara felt herself floating above the room, watching the farce play out. The theft, the betrayal, the machinery of power grinding forward without mercy. The general, unfazed, smiled and complimented Cole, but there was calculation in his gaze now. The stakes had changed. Alara recognized the look. A man who senses a story beneath the surface and is waiting for it to unfold. The contract was no longer a formality. It was a powder keg. Lightning streaked across the bay, painting the room in ghostly blue. Alara set a tray on the edge of the bar and exhaled, struggling to steady her nerves. She replayed the code in her mind, hunting for the fatal flaw she knew was there, the flaw only she could see. A flaw with consequences beyond lost sleep or academic disgrace. Something darker, deeper, the kind of thing that leaves scars not just on a resume, but on a conscience. Behind her, Marcus's pen hovered again. But now doubt flickered in his eyes. Cole's demonstration had worked too well. The general's aide tapped a note into his phone, and Alara knew it would only be a matter of time before the wrong person asked the right question. In that suspended electric silence, Alara understood what she had to do. She was no longer just a bartender, nor a ghost at the edge of history. The algorithm in Cole's hands was her own, but more than that, it was a loaded weapon, and tonight, the safety was off. As the storm battered the city and the world below prepared for sleep, Alara Vance faced the return of everything she'd tried to forget. She would have to choose, run again or step out of the shadows and risk everything to stop what she'd started. Above the city, in the cradle of power, the future trembled on the edge of a signature. And Alara, at last, was ready to reclaim her story. The minutes ticked past midnight as the energy in the summit shifted from electric to volatile. The $500 million contract still lay in wait, a single signature away from unleashing consequences no one at the table could fully imagine. Rain traced frantic paths down the vast windows as if the city itself was signaling warning. In that rarefied atmosphere, where careers and national secrets changed hands over whiskey and whispered promises, something far more dangerous hovered: truth and the risk of revealing it. Alara moved through the quiet chaos of power. The faces around the table blurred into symbols of everything she'd lost: her research, her reputation, and any hope of returning to the world she'd once inhabited as a rising star. But as the afterimage of her stolen code lingered on Dr. Cole's tablet, a new fire began to burn inside her. Fear was still there, but it was joined by anger and something harder: purpose. Her mind cycled through every ethical line she'd watched her old advisor cross, every warning she'd tried to give, every door that had slammed in her face. But now she was here, at the axis of decision, and she would not let herself disappear again. Marcus Thorne, still poised with pen in hand, seemed locked in a silent debate with himself. For a man so decisive, the hesitation was out of character. His instincts had kept him alive and at the top of an industry that devoured the weak and the careless. He felt the shift in the room, too. The way Dr. Cole's eyes darted, the general's polite mask tightening into suspicion, the faint tremor in the glass as another round of thunder rolled over the bay. It was the moment before the storm truly broke. Alara saw the split-second opportunity. It was now or never. Masking her resolve behind practiced calm, she glided closer to the head of the table, tray in hand, ready to play her last card. As Marcus reached to sign, she leaned in, feigning a small accident, a glass tipping, a thin spill crawling across the polished table. In the confusion, she bent toward Marcus, her voice a whisper meant for him alone. "Don't sign. That algorithm, it has a cascade failure. It's neurodegenerative." The words were barely sound, but they struck with the force of a detonator. Marcus froze, his pen just a hair above the line. The general's head snapped up, his gaze sharp. Dr. Cole went pale, his composure slipping for the first time all night. For one impossible second, the room was still, the power dynamic inverted by the quiet revelation of a single truth. Marcus's mind raced. The calculus of risk and trust recalibrated in an instant. He knew the cost of making decisions with incomplete information, but he also knew how quickly disaster could follow arrogance. His eyes locked with Alara's, searching for a lie, a motive, anything that would explain this intrusion at the final hour. What he saw instead was unmistakable: the conviction of someone who knew the price of silence. The general's voice sliced through the tension. "Is there a problem, Marcus?" The words came clipped and cold, meant to reclaim control. But Marcus was already standing, pushing back from the table. In that gesture, something irrevocable shifted. This was no longer just a business deal. It was a question of survival, for careers, for reputations, for lives. Dr. Cole tried to recover, but the panic was written in the way he gripped the edge of the table, the flush creeping up his neck. Alara met his gaze briefly, and in that flash of contact, all the old betrayals returned. The way her ideas had been praised in private and stolen in public. The way Harding had offered reassurance while quietly orchestrating her exile. Marcus straightened, turning to the assembled men in uniforms and dark suits. "Gentlemen, we need a 5-minute recess," he announced, voice steady. He didn't wait for a reply. The general's aide frowned, but the power in Marcus's voice was absolute. Deals could pause. Empires could shift. In this high-stakes world, a single doubt was enough to halt a Pentagon contract. As the room emptied, Cole moving stiffly, the general speaking in urgent tones to his aide, security watching everything, Alara felt a strange sense of vertigo. She had upended the evening with a single sentence, but the real reckoning was yet to come. She lingered by the bar, hands shaking now that the adrenaline faded, mind tumbling through worst-case scenarios. In her chest, her heart thundered, keeping pace with the storm outside. In the privacy of the empty conference room, Marcus closed the door and faced her directly. The city stretched out behind him, a grid of opportunities and dangers. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet crackled with tension, of accusation, of hope, of the vast chasm between what was true and what could be proved. But Alara held her ground. She would not beg, would not plead for belief. She had seen the future they were building and knew down to her bones that she was the only person left who could stop it from becoming a tragedy. Marcus studied her as if seeing her for the first time, not just a fixture behind the bar, but the axis on which the night now turned. Outside, the rain battered the glass, drowning out the city's endless noise. In that fragile, suspended moment, the fate of the $500 million deal, and so much more, hung on what Alara would reveal next, and how far Marcus was willing to go to hear the truth. Rain still hammered the glass walls of the summit as Marcus Thorne led Alara out a private side door, away from the echoes of suspicion and the hungry stares of the men in suits. The world outside the club felt darker, the air heavy with unresolved secrets. An armored Rivian waited at the curb, engine quietly humming, the driver's eyes flickering with recognition and worry as Marcus gestured for Alara to join him in the back seat. They sped through the city's neon-lit veins, the skyscrapers falling behind as the Bay Bridge unfurled ahead. The glow of San Francisco receded, replaced by the cold logic of the night. The silence in the car was not empty. It pulsed with questions, tension, and the thrum of decisions that couldn't be taken back. Alara could feel Marcus studying her, weighing her every breath, every twitch of her hands. She understood. She would have done the same in his place. Finally, as they crossed the midpoint of the bridge, Marcus broke the silence. He demanded the truth, not the half-truths or evasions he was used to hearing from competitors and boardrooms. He wanted to know who Alara really was, and why she, a bartender in a world of billionaires, was the only person who seemed willing to risk everything to stop the deal. Alara took a long, shaky breath and began her confession. Her story unraveled between the flickers of passing streetlights. Once she'd been Alara Vance, the prodigy, Stanford's brightest, years ahead of her peers, obsessed with the safe integration of human minds and machines. She described late nights filled with promise and discovery, the awe of creating something that could change lives. She recounted how her doctoral thesis had become the foundation for what the world would soon know as the Odyssey algorithm. But genius draws predators. Alara's advisor, Professor Lena Harding, had always pushed her for more. Results, breakthroughs, something patentable. Alara, idealistic and young, believed Harding was guiding her, mentoring her toward greatness, until the night everything burned, a simulation failure she could not ethically ignore, a warning that the feedback loop in her code could cause catastrophic neural damage, irreversible and cruel. When Alara raised her concerns, Harding's reaction was chillingly swift. She dismissed Alara's fears, pressured her to rewrite the results, and finally, when Alara refused, orchestrated a disaster. A server fire, supposedly accidental, that destroyed all traces of Alara's original research. The fire was only the beginning. Within days, Alara found herself blacklisted from every major lab and company, her name quietly smeared by whispered rumors. Her references vanished. With no allies and no future, Alara disappeared into the city, her career a ghost haunting Silicon Valley's innovation labs. Every job interview became a dead end. Doors that once swung open now slammed shut. Finally, desperate, Joa found work behind the bar at the summit, serving drinks to the very people building futures on stolen dreams. As the Rivian shot through the rain-soaked night, Marcus listened with the focused silence of a man used to unearthing lies. But there was no mistaking the anguish in Alara's voice, the precision in her account. When she reached the part about Dr. Cole, the story darkened further. Harding, it turned out, had not just destroyed Alara's career. She had sold the stolen work to Cole, who had built his own reputation and fortune on the algorithm's promise, conveniently erasing the origin and the warnings with it. Alara's voice grew steadier as she finished. They told me my work was destroyed. Instead, they took it, repackaged it, and now they're trying to sell it to the government. And the flaw, the one that could end lives, not just end careers, it's still there. If you sign that contract, Marcus, it's not just your company at risk. It's everyone who ever uses that system. And the blood will be on your hands. The car fell silent again, the city behind them swallowed by fog and distance. Marcus looked out at the dark water, his mind grinding through the details. The betrayal wasn't just personal or corporate, it was systemic. He understood now that he was not simply in the middle of a business coup, but caught in a web of theft, ambition, and lies reaching to the highest echelons of academia and technology. As they reached the other side of the bay, Marcus's phone vibrated, a message from his office, no doubt the general and Cole already pressing for answers, the Pentagon's clock ticking louder every minute. But Marcus didn't respond. His instincts told him to dig deeper. Alara, battered but unbroken, sat beside him, the living proof that the world he thought he controlled was built on shifting ground. He made a decision as the Rivian turned toward Silicon Valley. Whatever happened next, it would not be decided in the back rooms of private clubs or in the shadows of stolen genius. It would be decided by truth and by the woman beside him, no longer a ghost, but a force to be reckoned with. The fight for justice, for the future, had only just begun. The sun had not yet risen over Silicon Valley as the Rivian slid through the security gates of Thorn Industries, its headlights cutting sharp lines through the lingering mist. The campus was a city unto itself. Glass towers clustered around an enigmatic black cube that gleamed under floodlights, the nerve center known simply as the Cube. Here, the world's brightest minds engineered the future. Tonight, though, it was the site of a reckoning. Marcus led Alara through layers of digital and human security, past biometric scans and silent guards. The inside of the cube was nothing like the sterile labs of her past. Giant LED panels ran floor to ceiling, illuminating glass-walled work pods and touchscreen whiteboards covered in kun. Screens blinked with rolling algorithms and simulated neural maps. Every inch exuded an intoxicating sense of possibility, and also a warning that every idea was only as safe as those who controlled it. Marcus brought Alara to a central hub, his face set in grim determination. "Prove it," he said at last. The challenge simple but absolute. If Alara truly was the mind behind Odyssey's core, she would need to demonstrate it here, now, with everything on the line. The seconds felt heavy, loaded with the weight of Marcus's skepticism and the looming shadow of betrayal. Alara hesitated only briefly, then moved to a pristine workstation, her fingers trembling as she accessed the familiar architecture of her own lost creation. She sat alone at the illuminated desk, the world shrinking to a glowing monitor and the quiet hum of servers. The rest of the cube felt 100 miles away. She began by calling up the Odyssey code, Cole's version, flashy and flawed. The algorithms glittered with clever tricks, but beneath the surface, she saw the rot, quick patches covering gaping vulnerabilities, performance hacks where stability should have reigned. Drawing on memory and the scars of sleepless nights, Alara worked. Her hands settled into a rhythm, code flowing in sharp bursts as she rewrote the stability kernel, her original vision, resurrected and refined. She dubbed this revised framework the Phoenix Protocol, a system engineered not for acclaim, but for safety, resilience, and integrity. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus watched from a distance, his doubt morphing into fascination. Alara became a force, pushing herself harder than she had in years, recoding, testing, retesting, each pass erasing a piece of the theft that had exiled her. An hour vanished in a blur. Finally, she spun up a simulation, injecting the Phoenix Protocol into the neural network. The virtual test pilot began routine maneuvers, sharper, faster, with data streaming clean and safe. Alara loaded Cole's flawed version for comparison, pushing the simulation to run hundreds of hours in minutes. The result was devastating. After a threshold of 100 hours, the network began to spasm, neural feedback loops cascading out of control. The AI's response mimicked what she'd always feared: permanent, degenerative brain damage, simulated on a digital pilot. The screen showed cold, clinical charts of failure, proof as stark as any confession. She compiled a report, drawing clear, irrefutable lines between the Odyssey code and her own thesis, documenting the flaw in painstaking detail. Marcus leaned over her shoulder as the last chart loaded. He said nothing for a long while. The silence felt like standing on the edge of a canyon, listening for an echo that might never come. Then Marcus's expression changed. He realized the enormity of what he was seeing, not just the threat posed by Cole's theft, but the scale of genius he'd nearly discarded as a bartender. "You're not just right," he said quietly, awe breaking through his cynicism. "You're 5 years ahead of them." Alara allowed herself the smallest exhale, a flicker of relief. But there was no victory in her eyes, only the exhaustion of someone who'd been forced to fight for every inch. She knew proving herself was just the first step. Cole and Harding hadn't merely stolen her work. They'd weaponized it, hiding its flaws and endangering anyone who touched it. The real battle, the fight to expose what they'd done, was only beginning. Marcus moved quickly, sending encrypted messages and alerting his inner circle to halt all progress on Odyssey. He granted Alara root access to the system's core and every security credential she would need. "Find out how deep this goes," he ordered. He wanted to know not just if Cole had lied, but if he'd buried evidence, how many others had been harmed, how many warnings had been erased, and what Harding's true involvement was. Alara nodded, already lost in code and log files. The cube, usually a beacon of ambition, now felt like a crucible, hot, unyielding, demanding the truth at any cost. Screens flickered with lines of digital ghosts, clues buried in old backups and security sandboxes. Ilara pressed forward, driven by something stronger than anger or vengeance. She had something to prove, not just to Marcus, not just to herself, but to everyone who'd ever been told to stay silent and let power do as it pleased. As dawn crept over the horizon, the first light caught on the cube's mirrored glass, painting the valley in gold. Inside, Ilara worked on, unaware of the sunrise, focused only on her mission. In this room built for geniuses, she had finally reclaimed her place, not as a ghost, but as the architect of a future no one would ever steal again. Sunlight filtered into the cube in thin, precise bands, turning glass and metal into a shifting mosaic of gold and shadow. But inside the central hub, the world remained frozen at the electric edge of discovery and danger. Ilara sat before a bank of monitors, her mind a singular engine of purpose. With Marcus's full authority, she plunged into the digital heart of Thorn Industries, searching not only for proof of theft, but for the secrets that might still be buried in Odyssey's tangled code. She began with system logs, routine, almost boring at first glance. Most companies left these untouched, filled with automated pings and error messages, easily dismissed by anyone but the most obsessive. But Ilara knew that where there were secrets, there would be patterns. She moved deeper, layering filters, isolating anomalies, hunting for digital fingerprints. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, summoning lines of data and tracing them backward, chasing faint echoes through years of version histories. It didn't take long to confirm what she already suspected. Dr. Cole had left behind a trail, albeit a clever one. Buried beneath innocuous project files, Ilara found access logs with timestamps that predated Odyssey's official development window. Nights when Cole was supposedly at home, weekends when the labs were empty. The logs revealed file transfers with cryptic names, fragmentary code snippets that matched, line for line, sections of her abandoned thesis. But Cole was smarter than most. Instead of erasing everything, he'd buried his tracks beneath a maze of subdirectories, encrypting the most damning evidence with a secondary firewall. Ilara's pulse raced as she bypassed layers of obsolete passwords, her own sense of déjà vu growing sharper with every passing second. It felt almost intimate, a digital duel across time and betrayal. Then she found it. A server labeled Sandbox, flagged for legacy test projects. At first it appeared empty, a digital ghost town, but a string of log entries caught her eye. Test Subject 7. Ilara opened the directory, expecting little more than experimental code or simulation results. Instead, she found encrypted video files, medical notes, and a timeline that spanned months. The footage played in clinical silence. At first, it was almost hopeful. A chimpanzee, eyes bright, navigating a complex puzzle with speed and intelligence, guided by a prototype of the Odyssey neural interface. The animal's improvement was rapid, almost miraculous, as it manipulated levers and responded to symbols with unprecedented accuracy. But then, subtle at first, the decline began. The movements grew erratic. Frustration flickered in the animal's eyes. The next clips were more disturbing. Spasms, confusion, and finally, a collapse. The last entry was a single line in Cole's voice, flat and final. Test subject deceased, natural causes. Ilara's stomach twisted. She paused the video and scanned the attached logs, confirming her worst fears. Cole had seen the effects of the cascade failure firsthand. He'd witnessed the algorithm's neurodegenerative consequences in a living subject, then concealed the results, burying the footage, falsifying reports, and continuing development as if nothing had happened. This was more than professional theft. It was a crime of willful endangerment, a lie that put every future user of Odyssey at risk. Fueled by a fresh surge of anger, Alara dug deeper. She combed through backup drives, piecing together deleted emails and scrubbed chat logs. She found cryptic correspondence between Cole and Professor Harding, referencing a deliverable and vague promises about managing the fallout. The language was cold, clinical, people reduced to test subjects, ethics dissolved in the acid of ambition. Alara realized now that her exile had never been about a failed experiment. She had been silenced to make room for a version of Odyssey that could be sold, regardless of the cost, to those who trusted it. At her back, Marcus watched the evidence pile up, his initial skepticism dissolving into a hard, simmering fury. The simulation logs, the video, the emails, they told a story not just of theft, but of systematic cover-up. For every risk Alara had taken, for every warning she'd tried to give, someone in power had decided to gamble with lives for the sake of headlines and contracts. As the morning wore on, word came from the summit. The DoD officials were pressing for answers, Cole growing restless and defensive, the general's patience thinning. But Marcus's focus remained on the investigation. He saw now that Alara was not just the architect of Odyssey, but the key to saving his company's future and his own conscience. When Alara finally stood, exhaustion in every line of her body, she had the evidence in hand. The cube was quiet, the hum of machines a distant echo to the moral storm she'd uncovered. Cole had gambled everything on secrecy and deception. But now, the digital ghosts had names and faces, proof of the human cost of innovation twisted by ambition. The next step would not be fought in code, but in the open, with the whole weight of truth behind them. And as Alara and Marcus prepared for what came next, they understood. The real danger was never the algorithm. It was the people willing to hide its failures for profit, no matter the price. Morning sunlight crept across the sleek lines of the cube, but inside, the world remained saturated with secrets and static. Alara's mind churned, haunted by the evidence she'd uncovered and the faces behind it. Cole's brittle arrogance, Harding's cold ambition. Yet for all she'd found, a sense of unfinished business gnawed at her. Something deeper was buried in Odyssey, beyond the theft and the cover-up. She had proven the algorithm's danger and Cole's deception, but she felt another presence lurking in the system, one last ghost waiting to be unearthed. Marcus, now fully convinced and grim, cleared his schedule and dedicated his staff to securing the building. Trusted engineers swept for bugs, and access to the neural lab was revoked for anyone not personally authorized by him. Alara barely noticed. She was deep in the data, probing Odyssey's codebase and its tangled web of backups. Every new discovery only seemed to raise the stakes higher, and every answer revealed a larger, uglier question. At last, she found it. A nondescript folder, encrypted and buried behind multiple layers of obfuscation. Its name was a single word: Icarus. The password prompt demanded something personal. Alara stared at the screen, mind racing, recalling every fragment of Harding's history, searching for a key no machine could guess. Then she remembered. Harding's daughter, lost to illness years ago, a wound never acknowledged in public. Alara typed the name, hands trembling, and the folder opened with a whisper. Inside, the real scheme came into focus. Documents, logs, and digital correspondence sprawled across her monitors like a spider's web of betrayal. The theft of her thesis had been only the first move. Cole and Harding had knowingly sold the flawed version of Odyssey to the Department of Defense, all while planning to auction off the stable, safe version, her Phoenix protocol, to the highest bidder. In a chilling twist, the buyer wasn't just another tech rival, but Gavin Stryker, CEO of a competing firm notorious for shady overseas dealings and rumored connections to hostile foreign actors. The evidence showed it all in black and white: emails mapping out shell companies and bank transfers, calendar notes for secret meetings, even a draft contract with Stryker's company, each line a betrayal of country and conscience. Yet the most terrifying revelation was buried in the technical blueprints. The Phoenix protocol they intended to sell carried a concealed backdoor, a hidden command that could allow whoever controlled it to shut down, reprogram, or even incapacitate any neural-linked user. It was no longer corporate espionage or patent theft. This was treason, weaponizing innovation for profit and power, risking national security for a private payday. Ilara's breath came shallow as the magnitude settled in. She scrolled through plans to disguise the back door as a failsafe and messages discussing plausible deniability if ever questioned. Cole's arrogance was matched only by Harding's ruthlessness, their ambition eclipsing every boundary of ethics or patriotism. The implications spiraled outward. In the wrong hands, Phoenix could be used to sabotage pilots, turn soldiers into puppets, or destroy lives on command. Marcus entered the lab quietly, reading the horror on Ilara's face before she could speak. The proof was irrefutable. His anger now burned icy, betrayal not only by trusted colleagues, but by the system he'd believed in. He watched as Ilara gathered files, compressing damning evidence into a drive that felt heavier than any contract or patent. There was no more room for doubt or delay. The conspiracy reached so far and so deep that any attempt to go to the authorities through normal channels risked warning Cole and Harding before justice could catch up. Outside, the world carried on, oblivious to the digital knife poised above its future. Inside the cube, the air was thick with the sense of impending collision. Marcus organized a plan, using only his most trusted staff, to secure all sensitive data and ensure that no one left the building with so much as a flash drive. Ilara, running on adrenaline and purpose, sent anonymous messages to federal authorities, encrypting them so that only high-clearance agents would understand the urgency and the threat. Every click and keystroke carried risk. Security systems could be compromised. Allies could turn out to be moles, and at any moment, Cole or Harding might sense the walls closing in. Ilara worked with the grim clarity of someone who had spent years being hunted and silenced. The memories of exile and humiliation sharpened her focus. This time, she would not be the one erased. Marcus kept vigil at her side, a wall between her and the outside world. In the early hours, word came that Cole was missing from his home and had not shown up at the summit. Harding's assistant was seen frantically shredding documents at a university office across town. As the day bled into afternoon, Ilara double-checked her evidence, the entire treasonous plot now mapped and ready for the next stage. She realized this was more than vengeance or redemption. If they failed now, the cost would be measured in lives and national security, not just careers. There would be no turning back. And so, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Ilara prepared for the final confrontation, knowing that the real battle, one that would reach from the halls of power to the shadows of cyberspace, had just begun. The light in the cube turned sharp and cold as the hours slipped away, every shadow feeling longer, every screen a portal to another threat. For Ilara, exhaustion was an afterthought. her body running on the jagged electricity of urgency and dread. The evidence of treason was locked, triple-backed, and prepared for the authorities. But the storm was far from over. With the plot now fully exposed, she understood something else. Men like Cole and Harding didn't simply run when cornered. They fought, and they destroyed what they could not control. Marcus orchestrated a rapid lockdown of Thorne Industries, his top security scrambling through protocols, watching for any sign of infiltration or sabotage. But as the day crept toward evening, the threat arrived in a more insidious form. A digital alert flared on the monitoring system, so sudden and subtle that only Alara noticed. It was a remote command, masked as a routine update. Yet to her, the code signature was instantly familiar. An emergency overwrite command, targeted not at corporate files or evidence, but at the test server for Subject 8. Alara's heart slammed in her chest. Subject 8 was not just a data artifact. It was a living human volunteer, someone in a medical coma, someone whose life was now dangling by a thread. Months ago, Cole and Harding had quietly begun live human testing, covering it with falsified ethics approvals and paying off whistleblowers. Now, with exposure imminent, Cole was attempting to destroy the last living evidence by triggering the same cascade failure that had killed the chimpanzee. If he succeeded, not only would a life be lost, but the single undeniable proof of Odyssey's danger would vanish forever. Without hesitation, Alara plunged into action, opening a direct line to the test server. She bypassed standard protections, her fingers flying over the keys as she watched the malicious command begin its process. Memory overwrites, neural feedback amplification, brainwave patterns spiking erratically. The screen filled with rolling error logs and urgent medical warnings. All the while, Cole's digital signature remained one step ahead, erasing tracks, closing doors, using security systems to flag Alara's presence as an unauthorized breach. At any moment, a real-world security team could be dispatched to the server room, acting on the assumption that she was the threat. The room blurred to nothing but code and time. Alara's mind snapped into battle mode. She spun up a virtual firewall, writing new lines of code in real time to intercept and quarantine the overwrite command. Marcus watched from behind bulletproof glass, speaking into his phone, shouting orders to keep physical teams from interfering. On Alara's screens, Cole's moves became more desperate. He tried to escalate privileges, to kill the power, to reroute the attack to every backup node at once. The two dueled in cyberspace, each keystroke a gambit, each failure a new risk. Alara dug deeper, leveraging her own Phoenix protocol to establish a defensive net around Subject 8's neural patterns. She redirected data through a dummy node, creating the illusion of compliance, while isolating the real target from the attack. Sweat dripped down her back as alarms sounded throughout the cube. Security lights flashed red. Marcus's voice was a distant roar, his faith in Alara now absolute. The weight of his company's future pressed against the glass. Minutes stretched. Alara's vision blurred from lack of sleep and the strain of live coding under siege, but she refused to falter. Cole, realizing he was losing, made one last desperate move. He triggered an auto-destruct protocol, a command to wipe not just Subject 8, but every associated server and every piece of digital evidence. In that split second, Alara gambled everything. She diverted the power surge into a honeypot she'd constructed in the background, an empty shell designed to absorb the destructive wave. The cube's lights flickered and buzzed. For a moment, everything went black. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the panicked footsteps of security in the halls and the pounding of Alara's heart in her ears. Then, one by one, the monitors came back online. On the main screen, Subject 8's brain activity was stable, shaken but alive. The last pieces of critical evidence, video and logs included, had survived. Alara slumped back, the enormity of what she'd prevented settling in like a storm after the wind. In the aftermath, the alarms finally subsided. Security teams, alerted by Marcus, arrived at the door just as the crisis ended. Alara presented them with the drive, encrypted and documented, her own logs proving the source and intent of the attack. The danger had been minutes, perhaps seconds, from erasing everything. Marcus, shaken but resolute, put an arm on Alara's shoulder. No words were needed. What had been at stake was clear on every face, every breath. The company, and far more than that, had been saved by the thinnest margin. Yet outside these walls, Cole and Harding were still at large, and the full consequences of the night's war in cyberspace were only beginning to unfold. The battle for the future, Alara realized, was not just about code or contracts. It was about who was willing to fight for what was right when it mattered most, even in the invisible war where the only weapons were intellect, integrity, and the refusal to give up, even as the world tried to erase you. Long before sunrise, the vast conference room of Thorn Industries was illuminated by harsh overhead lights, a stage set for reckoning. Outside, the world was still sleeping, but inside these walls, the day of judgment had come. Marcus Thorn stood at the head of the table, shoulders squared beneath the weight of everything that had unfolded, the betrayal, the conspiracy, and the narrow escape from disaster. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man who had walked through fire and emerged burned, but resolute. Alara Vance entered in the same torn bartender uniform she'd worn hours before, her hair wild from the all-night battle and her face drawn from exhaustion and adrenaline. In her hands was a simple flash drive, but its contents were enough to shake the foundation of an industry and topple careers. She walked with purpose, each step echoing in the silence as she crossed the polished floor and placed the drive in front of Marcus. The Department of Defense officials had already arrived, grim and unsmiling in their crisp uniforms. The general, the same man who had nearly toasted to the Odyssey deal hours earlier, now watched Marcus with unreadable eyes. His aides flanked him, faces impassive, their notebooks already open, pens at the ready. The air was heavy with expectation, each breath a question. Would Thorn Industries fall or rise again from the ashes of deceit? The doors swung open with a hush, and Dr. Julian Cole strode in, flanked by Thorn's security. Cole wore an air of forced confidence, a smirk tugging at the edges of his mouth, as if he believed the storm would break over someone else. He looked from Marcus to Alara with a flicker of contempt, but his eyes darted, betraying the anxiety gnawing at his core. He took his seat as if this were a minor boardroom inconvenience, his hands folded carefully on the table, trying to mask the sweat. The general nodded for Marcus to begin. No grand speeches, no second chances, just the stark, clinical rituals of accountability. Marcus connected the drive, and a series of files appeared on the main screen. Simulation logs, video evidence, emails, financial transfers, and, most damning, the hidden blueprints for the back door in the Phoenix Protocol. Alara watched the images flicker by, her heart beating fast. Not out of fear, but relief that the truth was finally being shown in the full, bright light. Marcus spoke with quiet authority as he laid out the timeline. How the Odyssey algorithm was stolen. How Cole and Harding suppressed the fatal flaw. how the chimpanzee experiment had ended in tragedy and was buried under false records. He detailed the plan to sell the safe version to Gavin Stryker, the foreign connections, and the back door that could be exploited for sabotage or control. Each fact was backed by time-stamped proof, undeniable and meticulous. The room was silent except for the hum of the projector. Even the general's aides, trained to mask all reaction, could not hide their growing tension as the scope of the betrayal became clear. When Marcus played the final video, Cole's own voice signing off on the natural causes death of Subject 7, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Finally, Marcus ended with the recording of the attempted digital murder of Subject 8. On screen, lines of code flashed, security alarms sounded, and Alara's real-time intervention played out in a compressed burst of activity. The evidence was overwhelming, the intent unmistakable. The general stood, fixing Cole with a gaze that could have cut steel. He spoke not with anger, but with the chilly formality of command. He did not threaten or bargain. Instead, he nodded to his aide, and the doors opened for the last time, not to Thorne's security, but to a detail of military police in crisp uniforms, their faces set and unreadable. They moved with calm precision, crossing the room to stand behind Cole. Dr. Cole tried to maintain composure, but the color drained from his face as the realization dawned. There would be no plea deal, no corporate shielding, no escape into the anonymous machinery of the tech world. The general spoke, voice echoing off the glass and stone. Dr. Julian Cole, you are under arrest for treason and conspiracy against the United States of America. The statement hung in the air like a gavel. The military police took Cole by the arms and led him away, the quiet footsteps of finality. Alara watched, a strange numbness settling over her, a combination of justice, sorrow, and the lingering wounds of everything she had lost. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, quietly, the general turned to Marcus. He said nothing, but his look carried the full weight of trust reclaimed and the stern promise that every detail would be investigated. As dawn crept over the horizon, Alara remained standing by the window, watching the sky shift from indigo to pale gold. The evidence was delivered, the villains exposed, but she knew the struggle was not truly over. There would be investigations, trials, the slow process of cleaning out the rot that had taken hold. Yet for the first time in years, she felt something new, a fragile, hard-won hope. She was no longer a ghost, no longer erased. Marcus joined her, silent but resolute. The future would be built from this reckoning, not from the ashes of lies. Together they stood and watched the new day rise, both changed, both redeemed, and ready for whatever came next. 6 months had passed since the morning that shattered Thorne Industries' illusion of invulnerability. In that time, the company's name had dominated headlines, sometimes as a cautionary tale, sometimes as an unlikely beacon of accountability. The boardroom where Marcus Thorne once faced ruin now carried a new energy, a subtle undercurrent of renewal that hummed beneath the glass, steel, and digital glow. The world outside had moved forward, but not in ignorance. Congressional hearings were held. News broadcasts dissected every detail of the Odyssey affair. Professor Lena Harding, her reputation in tatters, faced indictment and public disgrace, her name now synonymous with betrayal. Gavin Stryker's face appeared on international wanted lists, his empire under federal investigation for espionage and conspiracy. Cole, the architect of so much damage, awaited trial in a military prison, his silence traded for nothing. Within Thorn Industries, something remarkable had emerged from the ashes. A new subsidiary, Vance Thorn Neurodynamics, launched in the same conference room where so much had nearly been lost. The company's logo, a stylized phoenix, rising in a burst of circuitry, now hung over the glass doors, a promise of transformation, not just survival. Alara Vance, once a shadow on the edge of Silicon Valley, now stood before a panel of Department of Defense officials, her presence quiet but unmissable. Gone was the bartender's uniform, replaced by the understated confidence of a leader. As Chief Technology Officer, she commanded respect not with bravado, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had paid the highest price for integrity and survived. She presented the Phoenix Protocol, the culmination of years of vision and hard lessons. The demonstration took place in a secure, windowless lab beneath layers of physical and digital protection. The new neural interface was elegant, its core built on transparency and safety, its every line of code annotated, auditable, and shared with military regulators. There were no secret backdoors, no hidden commands, only carefully monitored redundancy and robust fail-safes designed to protect lives above all else. Alara explained the system's innovations: advanced monitoring to detect any sign of neural distress, real-time adaptive algorithms that prioritize the human mind over machine performance, and, crucially, a formal protocol for ethical review and continuous oversight. Every pilot who would use Phoenix would know its workings. Every upgrade, every patch, every change would be recorded and reviewed by an independent oversight board. Her words carried weight, not just technical expertise, but the force of lived experience. Around her, officers and engineers listened, not just with professional interest, but with a kind of wary gratitude. The memory of what had almost happened lingered in every nod, every silent glance. Marcus watched from a distance, letting Alara command the spotlight. For months he had worked behind the scenes, restructuring the company, fighting off lawsuits and hostile takeovers, all while rebuilding a culture of ethics and accountability. There were no shortcuts now, no backroom deals, only the slow, hard work of earning trust back one decision at a time. Outside the lab, the world shifted in subtle but profound ways. News broke that Harding had accepted a plea, implicating others and accelerating a wave of reform across tech and academia. Stryker's name vanished from the company registry, his assets frozen and his legacy tarnished by exposure. The industry watched Thorn Industries and Vance Thorn Neurodynamics as a case study, a company nearly destroyed by arrogance and secrecy, saved by the courage of those who refused to let injustice stand. On the evening of the Phoenix Protocol's official launch, Alara stood alone on the rooftop garden that overlooked the San Francisco skyline. The city below was a tapestry of stories, dreamers and builders, schemers and survivors all fighting for a place in the light. The air was cool, the wind tugging at her hair, the scent of rain still fresh from a passing shower. She thought of all she had endured, the betrayals, the loneliness, the long exile. She thought of those lost to ambition's shadow, the test subjects and dreamers silenced by the world's hunger for progress at any cost. But tonight, she also felt the weight lifting, the quiet relief that comes with setting things right, even when scars remain. Behind her, Marcus joined her at the railing, offering a silent nod, a gesture of respect, not possession. They stood together, the city sprawling beneath them, no longer haunted by ghosts, but by possibility. News tickers glowed on nearby skyscrapers, reporting Harding's sentencing, Strikers' capture overseas, the launch of Phoenix Protocol in active trials. In the background, a broadcast replayed images of the new company's team, the diversity and drive evident in every face. Ilara's name was no longer a whispered warning, but a signal of what was possible when one stood for truth, no matter the cost. As night deepened, she allowed herself a moment to dream, not just of machines and code, but of futures built on trust, of communities where no one would ever have to fight alone again. The city lights shimmered, a living map of second chances. Ilara Vance was no longer a ghost in the machine. She was the architect of its rebirth, her scars transformed into the wings of a phoenix, rising into a world forever changed.